In this video, I'm gonna go over my top 10 favorite tropical birding destinations in the world, coming up right after this. Hello guys, my name is Eddie, also known as Adventure Ed, and I am a keen birder. I'm a wildlife biologist, and one of my favorite parts about being a birder is traveling to exotic places in the world to find new birds and just to explore new places. Honestly, there is nothing more adventurous than exploring the tropics. I'm very fortunate to have lived in the tropics for over 2.5 years, including 6 months on a semester abroad in Australia when I was an undergrad. I also lived for a year in Mexico. I lived for about 9 months in Costa Rica, and I lived for 3 months in Ecuador. I've also made it to a bunch of other countries in Central America and in Southeast Asia, and I've gotten in a lot of birding and just a lot of fun general wildlife and nature adventures. The thing about the tropics is not only does it have the greatest biodiversity, but a lot of the organisms that you can find in the tropics are just super exotic because the evolutionary forces that are at work in the tropics, which includes the forces of natural selection and sexual selection, basically creates all of these really exotic life forms. And therefore, in the case of birds, it's just resulted in a ton of species of birds and a lot of birds that are really exotic, beautiful, colorful, and just have some really interesting behaviors. And a lot of places in the tropics are just so much different than places in like Europe or the United States. The culture of the people is just so much different. It just makes it so adventurous. So if you're a birder or you're thinking about getting into birding, I definitely suggest doing some trips to the tropics at some point because it's just literally the most fun thing in the world. So in this video, I'm going to go over my top 10 favorite places that I've been to in the tropics. Obviously, these are only places that I've been to. I'm fortunate to have been to a lot of places, but there are many places I haven't been to, including anywhere in Africa. So one thing I would love to hear from you guys in the comments is where you guys have been in the world to go birding in the tropics. So I'm gonna get into my top 10 list, and these places are in no particular order. So number 1 is Khao Yai National Park in Thailand. It's only 4 hours away from Bangkok. And I did a tour there for 3 days, just a general wildlife tour, but it was great birding. I saw my first hornbills there. There are also wild elephants there. A lot of people say it's kind of like the Yellowstone of Thailand. I also saw gibbons there as well. And this place is basically just tropical rainforest that goes over all of these mountains. It's an absolutely gorgeous place. The interesting thing is it's just 4 hours away from Bangkok, and the vast majority of tourists that go to Bangkok don't even know that this place exists. My next place on the list is Cat Tien National Park in Vietnam. Now this place is super special because part of the Vietnam War was actually fought in this park, and a huge part of the park was destroyed back during the Vietnam War. But the thing that's super cool about this place is it has recovered. So it's got some fascinating and really interesting natural history. But the cool thing about this place is it has recovered and it is thriving with wildlife. And because so much of it is secondary forest, I would say it is easier for birding. It is easier to see birds than a place with like primary closed-in tropical rainforest. There's also a lot of great water habitats here with a lot of good wetland birds. And they also have some great hides where they regularly have great looks at ground forest-dwelling birds as well. The next spot is the Atherton Tablelands in North Queensland, Australia. It's high up in elevation, and it's tropical rainforest. I forget the exact classification of forest, but there's just so many exotic birds here and just lots of other exotic wildlife. You can find platypus, you can find tree kangaroos, you can also find a species of bird of paradise, and as well several species of bowerbirds. As an undergrad, I studied at James Cook University in North Queensland, Australia, and I took a weekend trip to the Atherton Tablelands, and as a 20-year-old college student, I did a wildlife tour. And it actually wasn't that expensive because Australia is a pretty expensive country. And I saw a golden bowerbird, which honestly might be the coolest species of bird I've ever seen in my life. And just overall, the North Tropics of Queensland is known as the best birding region in all of Australia, so you definitely have to go. The next place on the list is Kakadu National Park in Australia. And I did a 3-day tour of this place. It was not a birding tour. It was just a general camping adventure tour, but the cool thing was my guide, he was quite a character, but he was such a great naturalist that he was actually a great birder as well. And Kakadu has a number of unique species to the Northern Territory of Australia. And the reason I chose this place is just the sheer beauty and uniqueness of this place. It's one of the coolest places I've ever been to in the world. It's got such a diversity of habitats everywhere from scrubland to seasonal forest to huge expanses of mangrove forest. And then it's got some really cool Aboriginal history as well. And just the views of this place are unreal. A lot of people say it's like the Yellowstone of Australia. So yeah, this is another spot that you definitely have to hit up if you go to Australia. The next place on the list is the Mountain Pine Ridge Forest Reserve in Belize. And the reason I chose this place is because it is so surreal, because there are some drastically different habitats wedged up right next to each other. So this is up in the highlands in the middle of Belize, not too far away from San Ignacio. And it's got this unique pine habitat that really kind of reminds me of the Sierras in California or maybe places in Colorado. And this habitat is right next to dense, wet, tropical rainforest. And it's super cool. You'll be in the Jeep going down the road, and within like 20 or 30 feet, the habitat just totally changes. And within both of these habitats, you get tons of beautiful species of Central American birds. The one that stands out in my mind was I got a lifer, lovely cotinga, and I saw it on that trip to Belize, and that was another one of those great birding memories. Now, the next place on the list is Rio Lagartos in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. It's only about an hour away from Cancun. Now, thousands, maybe millions of tourists visit Cancun, Playa del Carmen, Tulum on a yearly basis, and the vast majority of people don't even know about this reserve. It's mostly mangroves, but has other habitats as well, including dry tropical forest. And it's just a great place for water birds, and it's also an awesome place for flamingos. I actually camped out right next to a flamingo colony, which was feeding in this salt mine right at the park. And it was just another great, memorable experience. Now, the next place on the list is Corcovado National Park in Costa Rica. And this place is known as one of the most biologically rich places on the whole planet. And by that, I think people mean it just has the highest species density per unit area out of anywhere else in the world. And this is wet tropical rainforest right on the Corcovado Peninsula, which is the southwest coast of Costa Rica. I went there on an adventure with my brother when I was living in Costa Rica. And here there is just a plethora of scarlet macaws. Jaguars live in this place, plus tons of other wildlife. But we camped out and had an amazing adventure right on this gorgeous beach. This place is quite a haul to get to. You have to go down this really brutal road, and you need a permit. You need to apply way ahead of time to get into the park, but it really is an experience of a lifetime going to this place. My next favorite place is the Amazon rainforest of Ecuador, specifically Cubano. Now, Cubano is the big park that's in the northern region of the Amazon of Ecuador, and Yasuni National Park is the part that's in the southern region. I have heard that Yasuni National Park is better, but I've been to Cubano and it was just amazing. I saw all kinds of wildlife that week. We saw tons of monkeys. I saw an anaconda. And of course, I just saw tons of species of birds. And honestly, going to the Amazon rainforest is kind of like getting a magical spell cast upon you. There's just something about it that makes you fall in love with nature even more. Probably my favorite place in the world. The next spot on this list is the Mindo area in Ecuador, specifically the Tandayapa Bird Lodge. Now, I volunteered at the Tandayapa Bird Lodge for a couple months, and this place is famous to be the best spot for hummingbirds in the entire world. They have this porch set up with just thousands of hummingbirds zooming all over the place with dozens of species. And the habitat across this whole region is cloud forest. And the cool thing is when you go up and down in elevation, the habitat changes very quickly. Within just a couple hours, there's a ton of places in pretty different habitats, including Yanacocha, which is up in the highlands, Salanche, which is more of a wet lowland tropical forest. The larger region of this area is called the Choco region, and there's a bunch of endemic species, but many birders argue that the Choco region of Ecuador, for various reasons, is actually the best place for birding in the entire world. The next place on this list is the Galapagos Islands of Ecuador, and this is not your typical tropical birding place. I'm not going to spend much time talking about the Galapagos because everyone's heard of it. It's super famous, but as a birder, it's obviously in my top 10 places. It's not cheap to get to, but you can also do it in ways that are way cheaper than others. One thing I will say about being a birder and going to the Galapagos is you should read the book, The Beak of the Finch. And this book just tells the fascinating evolutionary story in depth about Darwin's finches. If you read that book before you go to the Galapagos, it will totally enrich your experience. And the last place on this list is this place called El Biotopo Quetzal. Now this place is right in the middle of Guatemala, and it's this little farm that's famous for seeing the resplendent quetzal. I've been to various places in Central America looking for the resplendent quetzal, and I never saw the resplendent quetzal. And then when I went to Guatemala, I finally saw them at this place. And what really made this experience is it was just such an authentic cultural experience. So at this farm, they had these tours, and from what I remember, I was greeted by a girl who was maybe like 10 years old. She spoke no English, and I remember her parents didn't even speak Spanish. And it was like $5 US for like a whole big, beautiful breakfast. And they feed you breakfast, and then the girl, she takes you out to go look for the quetzals, and it was basically guaranteed sightings of quetzals. I thought I'd see maybe 2 or 3, but I saw about 15, all different ages of quetzals. I saw the males with the long tails. And again, this was a fascinating birding memory, a memory that I will cherish forever. And that's it. That rounds out my top 10. And subscribe to the channel if you're interested in more birding stuff, more nature stuff, also health and wellness stuff. And remember, nature is always an adventure, not only in the tropics, but also in your own backyard. So take that green pill. I will catch you in the next one.